All right. So today, the first thing that we're going to talk about is how to get to the Google Drive that I set up for everybody here. So on Edsby, I made a post last night. Well, I guess technically this morning. It was a long night. And I said, tomorrow we'll talk about how we're going to be proceeding with the class, yada, yada, yada. So there is this wonderful, fun thing that says AP World History Google Drive. If you click that, it'll open up this. Um, it has all 9 units that we were going to cover for the entire year. Now, through Unit 7, and then on Monday we talked about Unit 8. Unit 9 we're going to talk briefly about today, but in all honesty, it's the shortest unit, and it's also probably the one that you all already know the most about. So we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. But moving on from now, essentially we've got hopefully about 6 weeks between now and when the AP test is actually going to be given. So on Friday, they're having the meeting where they're going to determine and announce kind of what the test is going to look like, when the test is going to be, all that kind of stuff. So until then, I have no idea what it's going to look like. So in order to kind of just prepare for that and have the timing for that, if you look at the calendar, that leaves us with 1, 2, 3, 4, hoping for 5 and 6, and that they end up doing like the test somewhere in this here week, which we're hoping got bumped a little bit. But if it happens here, that's okay. We'll just kind of adjust as we get through everything. So as of right now, e-learning is still going to take place through the 1st, but that leaves us with only realistically 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, even if we do come back into the classroom. So I wanted to have everything prepared for the rest of the year. So starting next week, all of your assignments are going to be in here. So we're going to review all of the units. We're going to start with the oldest things first and then come back from that, right? So Unit 1 is the stuff we started on all the way at the very beginning. Now you will notice in here, someone was nice enough to scan the entirety of the AMSCO book, and they scanned all of it and put it in here, which is a much shorter and more abbreviated form than your book that you have at home. So I uploaded the entirety of the chapters of the AMSCO book, and I'm going to move that around over here. I want to adjust that, but whatever. If you look at the bottom, though, it'll say like AMSCO 1.1 and then 1.2. This is 1.3 and 1.4, and then 1.5 and 1.6 are right here. These are all of the readings from the entire book. So this is everything that has to deal with Unit 1. And then you'll find your actual assignment. So this is a lot of stuff, but that's because you get to use all of this when you actually take the AP test. So this year, the AP test is open note, which means the more notes you have, the better off you're going to be, right? So within it, when you open this, you'll open it, you'll download it, it's a Word document, and this is going to be where you're going to do all your work. Each little front page has got this wonderful stuff on here, and you'll notice up here, this was created by Caitlin Tripp. She's a wonderful teacher, definitely not made by me. I'm not going to try and take credit for it, but it's wonderful. So what she did was broke down every single thing and literally made an entire review for everything that is in here. It's kind of a lot, but that's because we're going to cover all of these things and go over it all, and it is a lot of stuff that we learned throughout the year. This test is about everything from beginning of the year all the way to the end. It is not a semester exam, it is a year, right? So essentially all you have to do from now on out is each week you're going to complete one of the unit reviews. Since the test is only on units 1 through 6, we're only going to have to do 1 through 6, right? So you'll fill all these things in. There is a lot of information that you are going to remember. That's awesome. What I would like you guys to do is before you do any of the reading parts, before you do anything else, just open this and see how much you actually remember just off the top of your head, all right? Do that the first day that you open this. After that, then start looking up some of the information. You're going to want to go back and reread things. You're going to want to go back and actually look up answers to this stuff, and that's perfectly fine. That's what this is all for. But the first thing that I really want you to do is see how much you actually remember just on your own. Just how much do you really, really remember from 7 months ago, right? But all of your assignments are in here. At the end, it's got a whole bunch of terms. And then on the end of all of them, there's some sort of mapping thing. Now, if you open up like the drawing tool within Word, you can draw color and add things and kind of show stuff. But I will tell you now, the map activity for all of them at the end is going to be optional. You do not have to do this, but again, all of this is to better you for the test, right? So unit 1 will be in here. Unit 2 is right here. We'll do that the week after that. They're all set up the same way. But the nice part about this is if you find yourself having more time to work on things than you have plowed through all of Tiger King and you have nothing else to watch on Netflix at that point, you can work ahead. You can finish up with everything that we've got. We're only going to do units 1 through 6, for the next 6 weeks. But ultimately, if you want to work ahead, it's all here. The other nice part is once you've gone to this folder, you can bookmark or favorite this tab. So that way you will never have to go back to Edsby to find your assignment if you don't want to, right? Edsby has been kind of choppy here and there. It's been better in the last couple days, but sometimes it's just non-responsive, right? So if you bookmark this page, if you have a Google account, you can add it to your drive. You all have viewing rights to all of this stuff. I'm never going to take it away. It's there for you if you ever want to use it, right? So when you actually have that, that means you can bypass ever going to Edsby again until you have to submit your assignment. And even then, everything from here on out is always going to be due on Sunday night at 11:45, right? So when you're there, you'll go to Edsby, you'll go to the assignment, you'll turn it in, you'll add that document in, submit it, you're done. I'm going to have all of the units up, so the due dates will be up there. So if you want to work ahead, you can turn your stuff in early. That's fine. That's perfectly acceptable and okay. If you don't have your stuff turned in by the end of the week, I'm going to have to go back, look at your stuff, and then end up marking you absent for the week. You really don't want that. The attendance has been changed since the last time we talked. They're now doing attendance where only second period reports it all. However, if you aren't doing your assignments on here, then I have to fill out a form and send a report off. And that's just not good for anybody involved, right? None of us want to end up having to do extra work. What's up? Oh, you killing my vibe. But ultimately, I just want you guys to actually be here, turn in your stuff. If you want to work ahead, you can, but it's all here for you, right? So I'm going to pause the recording and talk to you guys for a second here so that way we can actually cover some stuff in case you have issues with things, so that way we can talk about it, and then I'll resume it for the actual content we're going to cover. So I'm going to pause this part and go. To jump into Unit 9, Unit 9 is all about globalization and interconnectedness. This is the world that all of you are more familiar with. After the Cold War, the barriers kind of fall on a lot of different issues that had been keeping major world powers apart from each other. And once that is all kind of done, the world becomes very much more interconnected. We see globalized trade. We have shipping from all over the world. That's why we have cars in the United States that have parts that were made in Venezuela, Morocco, China, and India, and then assembled at a plant in Cleveland, Ohio, right? It's what allows all of that to actually occur, right? So it's the interconnectedness of everyone. So I'm actually going to open up the review on here and we'll talk about it. And I'll kind of like discuss some things and like talk about it all because you're not going to have to do the Unit 9 one. So it's not like there's any harm in talking about it all. So for the globalization one, the big one here, and it has actually become one of like the banners for our group, is like technological advances and limitations when it comes to the disease. Pretty fitting for what we're talking about right now and what we're going through right now. But some of the major things, oh, sorry, I'm going to read all these. So the advancements in technology and exchange, so we end up with new modes of communication. So be it the radio, cell phone usage, to think that I grew up in a world that didn't have cell phones when I was in elementary school. And then by the time I was in high school, the majority of Americans had one. And now the vast majority do. Is kind of wild to think how fast and rapid that's changing. The development of the internet arguably changed the entire world more than anything else in history. Advancements in transportation, we have air travel, shipping. That's how we're able to get things all over the world to all kind of come together and actually create one unique thing now, right? So all of these are only possible in this time and age, right? There's new energy technologies. We end up using petroleum for a lot more things. We end up using nuclear power that didn't exist before the 1950s, right? There's more effective birth control, which limits population explosions because that's one of the biggest things that allows a society to gain wealth is population management. The green revolution occurs. We start like figuring out how to farm significantly better. We learn how to genetically modify organisms and different plants to become more pest resistant or to survive in conditions that they otherwise definitely couldn't, right? There's a reason why you can get strawberries here year round. And it's not because they're grown here year round. It's because of different advancements that we've had to where we can safely store food or grow food in places it otherwise wasn't able to before this time. There's medical innovations, the concept of vaccines and antibiotics. Again, never been more applicable than in today's world right now, where arguably the thing that we are most concerned about moving forward here is finding vaccines to things. When it comes to technological advancements, there also are limitations, right? So diseases as well as medical and technological advances have great impact. Diseases associated with poverty now. This is especially true today. The most devastating diseases that are still treatable only exist in places with high poverty. Wealthy people tend to be able to gain access to medical technology and advancements significantly faster, easier, and better than those who live in poverty, right? Diseases that are associated with that consist of malaria, tuberculosis, cholera. A lot of these are what we see in places that we tend to label as, quote, third world countries, right? So they're countries that aren't necessarily as developed as ours or others for that matter. There's emergent epidemics. We have the 1918 Spanish flu, which is what right now, like the whole COVID-19 epidemic is getting related to, even though it's very, very different. You have Ebola, which is another major epidemic that has occurred. There's been 3 major outbreaks, but the most recent one happening all the way back in 2014 or 2015. We also have the HIV and AIDS epidemic, which has very much gotten more under control. But from the 70s and 80s all the way through until modern day now, HIV and AIDS has run rampant through different societies and different areas, especially in countries that are less well off, right? Diseases that are associated with increased longevity also start to appear. When the average life expectancy was only 45, diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia didn't really exist. There's no signs of those things because people didn't live long enough to develop them, right? So we end up now having more people die from things like heart disease than anything else in the world. But heart disease is really only an issue for most people whenever you get to 60 plus, right? These are diseases that up until our life expectancy got to this point, we've never had to deal with before. Um, People in medieval Europe didn't have heart disease because they didn't live long enough for a heart attack to kill them. They were too busy dying from malnutrition and um, other basic, more outrageous diseases, right? Um, the technological advancements that occur during this time period from 1900 to today are absolutely insane. To put it in perspective, remember that in 1900, cars didn't exist really. People still moved around on horse and buggy. And now in 2020, we have planes and helicopters and cars and highways and interconnected systems and underwater tunnels, um, all kinds of things that never were even thought imaginable in 1900, right? So human activity contributes to the deforestation and desertification, and a decline in air quality is also kind of a big deal. So when it comes to the way that technology interacts with the environment, it's important to remember that things like the Amazon forest getting burned down or broken down, or parts of the desert in Africa somehow now being able to be farmed, those aren't, quote, natural things, right? They're things that don't occur without human interaction, right? It takes mankind's touching hand to kind of make those things happen, for better and for worse. We have very much decreased the amount of forest that is in the world. The amount of trees that are currently standing are about one-fifth of what used to be standing before 1700. So we have gone through deforestation rapidly in certain areas, right? Humans began to compete for resources. This wasn't really a problem for most of recorded history. Resources were important, but we didn't necessarily buy, sell, trade, and go to war over them, right? The release of greenhouse gases and pollutants into the atmosphere lead to climate change. And if you disagree with that, I'm sorry, you're wrong. The economics in a global age. So many governments encourage free markets and economic liberalization. We see this especially at the end of the Cold War. After the Cold War ends, the way that capitalism has spread, it shows that it very much won the fight against communism. Capitalism ends up on top, and it is kind of taken off to be the leading economic theory in the world. There's a growth of knowledge in economics. Within the U.S., Japan, Finland, industrial production and manufacturing occurs in Vietnam and Mexico. Anytime that you look and realize that your products are made in other places than here, it's important to realize that's only possible because of the global economy that we have formed. There's economic institutions and multinational corporations, regional trade agreements, like the current trade agreement that was just signed earlier this year, between like the United States, Canada, and Mexico, right? The trade agreements are occurring all over the place at all different kinds of times, right? But they're almost always associated with free market economics. So like within the European Union, trading things without having to worry about paying different dues or having different currencies, things like that. It's all different agreements get made so that way different countries can trade with each other and be involved with each other's economies with as few barriers as possible, right? There's also calls for reform. So rights get to be challenged during this time period. We see women gaining the access to vote almost globally during this time. We also see things like they get challenged based on preconceived ideologies and notions, right? So there's the civil rights movement. There's all kinds of different things get challenged based on things like race or class, gender, religion. All of these things have major movements during this time period. Access to education and participation in politics and professional roles become much more inclusive. This includes not only to women, but also to the poor. The idea that anyone can go to college now if you can get the right grades and or loans to go is almost unheard of 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago. 50 years ago, most people still did not go to college, and now the majority of people do. There's movements that protest inequality of environmental and economic consequences of global integration as well. So things like Greenpeace start to form here, the World Wildlife Fund also, right? We also have a very globalized culture. Political and social exchanges of the 20th century lead to changes in art and pop culture. The way that music and movies and sports, all of those things are now all integrated, right? So we end up with places like India adapting and having like what they call Bollywood, right? Like their own interpretation of movies get brought over there. We have different music that gets spreads all over the place. It always blows my mind that at the end of the Cold War, one of the things that's wild is that the most popular song in Russia was by Michael Jackson. That's completely unheard of, and to think that it's even possible is kind of weird. Consumer culture becomes globalized. We end up with things like eBay and Amazon. Coca-Cola is served in over 150 countries, right? All of these things have spread to the point where now you can get the same thing all over the place, right? There is, however, a resistance to globalization, right? So there's responses rising to cultural and economic globalization that took many different forms. So we have things like the World Bank being protested against. We have things like social media being not only encouraged in some places, but completely outlawed in others, right? The fact that like Facebook is banned in China. So there is, a resistance to globalization that occurs during this time period as well. Institutions also do end up developing within a new globalized world. So we end up with new international organizations, mainly the United Nations, right? So the United Nations forms as kind of a world peace organization, right? It's set up to solve issues and solve problems before we end up having the whole world going to war. This is the time period most of you are most familiar with because this is the time period most of you exist in, right? These are all things that you can actually visibly see being different than a lot of the other stuff that we've talked about, right? So throughout the year, you haven't necessarily been able to relate to a lot of different things. So you might not really be able to fathom or grasp how certain things are possible, but in Unit 9, when it comes to globalization, this is all that you know. You have grown up in a globalized world, so have I. The only people that haven't probably were born before 1950, right? After that time period, the world has become an open and interexchanged place. Everyone has been able to exchange goods and get things all over the world now. We have companies that are using different countries for different products, and also able to sell your product in different countries as well, right? The thought of something like Amazon existing in the 1700s is laughable. To think that you could order something in the United States and get your product from somewhere in Europe, made by somewhere in Asia within 3 days. That's comical to them, right? But for us, that's a reality, right? You can buy a car online now. To think that was even a possibility 60 years ago would be even fun, right? So within a globalized world, it is important to realize just how different things are now than they were when all of this course took place. Right? So that's Unit 9 in a nutshell. I very much covered that really quickly because, well, this year you're not going to be assessed on it. And honestly, it's the thing that you know the most about already. Right? So with that being said, I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we can talk about things, we can ask questions, and we can have a discussion. So